Hi, and welcome back to Heimler's History. In the last video, we talked about how the Industrial Revolution began and why specifically it began in England. In this video, we're going to talk about how the Industrial Revolution spread from England to much of the wider world. So if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's get to it. So after the Industrial Revolution was firmly established in Britain, other nations began thinking some thoughts. So let me get this straight. If we start building factories and urban centers, then we can get huge portions of our population to start crowding into cities, living in squalor, working long days in dreary and dangerous working conditions, dumping their urine and fecal matter into the streets, polluting the water with industrial waste, making it impossible to breathe a full breath because of the coal smoke pouring out of the stacks? Well, that sounds pretty dumb. Yeah, but you'll become fabulously wealthy. We're in. So from Britain, the industrial process began to spread out into Belgium and France and Germany, mainly because those nations had the same natural advantages that Britain did. And if you want to know what those are, see the previous video linked below. And after that initial spread into the European continent, the Industrial Revolution spread to the United States, into Russia, and into Japan. And it's those three nations that will be the focus of this video. So what did industrialization look like in the United States? Now, once industrialization came to the American shores, it wasn't long before the United States was the most powerful industrial force in the world. And the main reason for that is the huge waves of European immigrants that began showing up on her shores in the late 19th and early 20th century. Most of these immigrants were Irish and German and often settled in urban centers. And because factories needed unskilled laborers to keep their machines churning, and because the factories wanted to pay these machine churners next to nothing, immigrants fit the bill. And not surprisingly, while it was good in some ways that these immigrants found work, they also found a substantial chunk of Americans who thought that the immigrant presence polluted the American nation. As far as I'm concerned, if you don't speak American, you ain't American. Alright, how about the spread of the Industrial Revolution into Russia? Well, in Russia, industry focused heavily on the building of railroads. And beginning in the late 19th century, Russia undertook the magnificent feat of constructing the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which stretched all the way from Moscow to the Pacific Ocean. And the chief effect of the completion of this project was a significant increase in trade with eastern states like China. And another focus of the Russian industrial movement was the expansion of the steel industry. And by 1900, Russia was the fourth largest producer of steel in the world. You know, not to brag or anything, but when it comes to steel production worldwide, we're fourth. Weird flex, but okay. And now let me take a moment to apologize to all the Russians watching for that terrible Russian accent. I think that was just Gru from Despicable Me, so, you know. Sorry. Okay, what did the industrial look like as it spread into Japan? Well, here it was a little different because Japan industrialized not because they saw the Western industrial process and thought, oh, that's such a great thing, we've got to have it. Japan's choice to industrialize was a little more defensive, and here's what I mean by that. The Japanese possessed an ancient culture, of which they were very proud, and when they looked at all the social and political and economic changes that came along with industrialization, the Japanese were smart enough to see that wholesale adoption of this new way of life would put their cherished cultural values at risk. But at the same time, Japan could see the writing on the wall, and they knew that there was no stopping this new wave of industry. And it was becoming clear to them that the power in the world was gathering around these new industrial nations. So Japan decided to borrow some of those Western industrial techniques in order to make themselves viable in this new world order. But they only did it insofar as it kept those Western powers at bay from coming in and destroying their traditions and their culture. Now, as industrialization is taking over these places that we just mentioned, there are still states that are manufacturing goods for sale, but not on the scale as these industrialized nations. And in this respect, an honorable mention goes to those Middle Eastern and Asian nations who continue to manufacture goods, but not on the industrial scale. And as a result, their share in the global manufacture of goods during this period declined. And let me just give you a couple of examples. First example, shipbuilding in India and Southeast Asia. Now, despite a revival of shipbuilding in this region at the end of the 17th century, the increasingly oppressive British rule in India especially meant that shipbuilding went on a severe decline. And one of the main reasons for this was that the British Navy went ahead and took over in the Indian Ocean. Second example, ironworks in India. Now, the ground beneath the Indian soil was rich with iron, and previous to this time, they prospered from it greatly. But again, because of the steep tariffs imposed by the British, the Indians found it was no longer really worth it for them to mine the iron and engage in any sort of economically meaningful metal work. Also during this time, there was an uprising in India against British rule. And long story short, the British began suspecting that much of the iron that the Indians were mining was being turned into ammunition to then be delivered into the bodies of the British, which they found incredibly rude. And so the British, for all intents and purposes, shut down the Indian iron industry. And by the early 1800s, that industry was basically non-existent. And that meant there was all the more room for the industrial powers to flex. Okay, that's what you need to know about the spread of the Industrial Revolution from 1750 to 1900. If you're new here, then go ahead and subscribe, and I'll keep making videos for you. If you want to see more of this bald, bearded, gap-toothed man talking about history, then click right here and all your dreams will come true. And finally, if you want to help support this channel, then there's a link to Patreon right there, and you can join the generous folks who keep this channel going month to month. Heimler out.